and I got enough power. So I have Etherpad here, and then in this other corner, I've got.
Yeah, that's what I usually do. I know. We just move. We know. We know. Yeah, and what's even better, it's recorded. There is no off mic in these rooms. Mm-hmm. It's really funny. You go to the beginning of the recording and it's there. Welcome to the second meeting of NetMod. We're going to get started. We're going to be a bit tight on time because we had extended discussions. I feel like we should all come in closer. We got a big wide room, but then you won't be able to see the screens actually.
The room scheduling gods have blessed this session, so thank you.
Right, we're going to move that half of the room. Anyway, we're going to get started because we are going to be tight on time. I'm actually going to invite everyone to join us in Etherpad. The reason for that is the place you will see the revised agenda. We've moved things around. We had to carry over 3 presentations from the last session, and we added and we dropped one at the I2RS one at Sue's request. So time is going to be a little condensed. That'll also afford you the opportunity to take some notes as we progress the discussion, and that is always helpful to us. To get to the Etherpad, go to the tools page. It's on the last URL here. So tools.ietf.org/wg/netmod, and click on agenda and then Etherpad 98. As always, we have the note well. We're getting late in the week. You should be familiar with it. Basically says whatever you contribute here, whatever you say here, is a formal contribution to our process. I think we've gone over this trivia enough, but here's another opportunity to remind you to do the Etherpad. As always, we are recording audio. We have video over there. And there is a box for the speakers to stand in while they're talking. And when you come to the mic, please state your name. We're in the second session, so we've moved here is basically from the last 4 presentations. We've moved 3 of those into this session. And on session 2, we have dropped the I2RS presentation. The order has also changed. The right place to see it is in Etherpad. Not on that slide. We dropped you. You got your request. Yes, it helps us on our time. So with that, I'd like to jump to who's next.
Yeah, Rob Bolton with the interface model update. But so also, I just want to follow up on the poll that we did in last time's session on the recommendation. I understand there was some confusion about what was recommended exactly. So we will be putting out text that clearly specifies that recommendation. It will be put into 6087 biz. So we're going to pull 6087 biz back to the working group to add this text into it. The recommendation in terms of using the top level foo and not using foo state. So expect that text to be sent to the NetMod mailing list, and we'll also invite other mailing lists to join that discussion.
And importantly, since it's going to be text in a working group document, the text is subject to working group input and review. So what's coming out is an edict. It is a starting point, but it's something we want to get feedback on very quickly. And we particularly want to hear from folks who are implementing and who will be impacted by the recommendation. So please take a look at it and respond to it as rapidly as you can. With that.
Okay, so I'm Rob Wilton, and I can barely see the slides, so I might talk about different stuff that's on the slides. I'll do my best.
You could stand anywhere you
Oh,
want.
fine, the camera's...
You could stand anywhere you want. Yeah.
I'll stand here because then I can actually tell you what I'm talking about. So, talk about two Yang models, two drafts are moving forward. One is the interface extensions draft. I've had reviews from a couple of people, some good feedback, and most of those comments have been addressed. There's effectively three issues that I would like to raise here, and either get feedback here, or if not here, I'm happy to receive it on the A-list, but it'd be good to try and get these models finalized and published. I've added a new counter for destination MAC address drop, and I would like to add some Ethernet histogram counters. So this is interesting because it's some of the stuff that's come out of the work I'm doing in IETF 98-NETMOD-20170330-1740 for Ethernet Yang, and there's bits of that they don't want to standardize there. I'm going to try and standardize here. So I'll talk about that later at the end of the session. So the first opening issue is a forwarding mode leaf. So there's a leaf that we have defined in the model that effectively says whether the service you're providing or the forwarding mode is an optical layer or a layer 2 or a layer 3 forwarding. And the idea here is that some platforms, some devices optimize their hardware entries depending on whether it's layer 2 or layer 3 forwarding. And so this leaf is useful for those platforms to when they're instantiating these objects in their platforms. In addition to that, it also could be very useful as a sort of aggregation point for when you're configuring different features that might be either layer 2 or layer 3. So the idea could be that you want to put constraints and say, I only want a layer 2 ACL configured if this leaf has been set, or this leaf's been set and it's been set to be layer 2. Or to phrase it another way is, if this leaf has been set to be layer 2, only allow a layer 2 ACL or layer 2 QS policy to be configured. So I would like to get some feedback, possibly on whether people think this is a good idea to have in the model or whether it should be dropped. So does anyone have any thoughts here? If there's no feedback, I probably intend to leave it in the model, is my default position, but I'll also ask these questions on the list. Yeah. There is one.
AC Lindum Cisco Systems. I think from a standpoint, at least everything I've been used to, I think keeping it in there for constraints, if nothing else, what is valid on that type of interface, it's good to keep it in. But that's my opinion.
Yes, and I think the way you would model that is it would be an optional thing. So if it's configured, you would check against that constraint, and if it's not, you wouldn't. So it doesn't impact people. So the second open issue is to do with the bandwidth parameter that I put in. So the Cisco OS has this and uses this, and then some other OSs I think that I checked also have this, but it's a bit ambiguous as to exactly what it means. So when AC commented on this, he pointed out that there's a reserved bandwidth as part of OSPF TE extensions, and I think a similar one in ISIS as well. So at the moment, my question was whether I should try and include this, keep this in the model, and if I do, then I'll rename it to reservable bandwidth, or should this be included just in the OSPF TE and IS TE models? Is that a better place for it? Or do I drop it altogether? So again, does anyone have any thoughts on this? I'm not quite sure which way to go here.
AC Lindum, I think it's wrong to configure it in the IGPs. I mean, I can't see a reason if you are running TE on both protocols, which I'm not sure why you would be, why you wouldn't want to put it right on the interface instead, because it's an attribute of the interface, not something of the protocol running on the interface.
Okay.
So Christian Hops, so to that end, it seems like a TE thing. Wouldn't it be great if some TE model was augmenting things to add this?
To add this in the TE models?
Yeah, this is an interface model, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or it's extensions to the interface model, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a TE attribute. You would think that a TE model would augment the interface to add it, not the IGPs or your.
Okay,
I don't know.
yeah, yes.
You can speak for the T model office. We do have it on the T interface, which augments the interface.
And do you have this attribute?
Yes, we do.
Okay, then I think the answer at the moment is we drop it and yeah. Okay. Thank you. Open issue 3 is about the loopback configuration. So I've defined the loopback basically around layer 1 loopback. So like an internal loopback or an external or line-based loopback. But I also noticed that we have a data plane loopback service, which is really sort of layer 2 feature that allows you to loop back on a sub-interface or loop back on particular VLANs. And it acts a bit differently in terms of it being sort of more time-based or session-based. So there's a couple of questions that sort of came out from that, is whether it's worth trying to align these two into one common Yang leaf or be Yang container, I think, if you have the data plane loopback. And then the second question, again, is if you were to do that, or it applies generally, is whether this loopback configuration should be something that's a bit more ephemeral in nature. The way I've modeled it at the moment is just as a configuration leaf that meant that you'd naturally get rid of the startup config, but other devices, I think, potentially have this as something that you configure and then reboot the device, it would naturally go away. So does anyone have any thoughts on either of those 2 points as to whether aligning this makes sense with the data plane loopback, or whether I should be looking at making this an ephemeral configuration in some way, which might be tricky? So my preference, I think, if I don't hear anything back, would be to keep it as it is and keep it as, at the moment, as just a physical interface loopback feature. Yeah. Comments? Right, so that covers my 3 issues I had on that one. Again, the sub-interface VLAN model, that's become a working group document after the last IETF. So it's only really had relatively minor updates, and there's one issue that I would like to discuss now and get some feedback on. So in terms of how it's structured at the moment,
Rob, just a heads up, you're running out of time.
1 minute, okay. So at the moment, the way it's structured is with a list, and that's designed, because it's got a list, it's got an index in there to identify which tag it is, and it allows it to be extensible. So at the moment, if you had it 2 tags, you could extend to 3 tags or more a feature. I'm not sure how likely that is. The alternative way of structuring it would be to effectively have explicit outer tag and second tag containers, and then use groupings to group the extra bits together, which looks like a potentially simpler model in terms of configuring. So I wanted, is there any opinions on to whether having a list-based structure is better, or a more explicit but sort of slightly simpler based model would be better? If there aren't any comments here, maybe if people think about this, they could post back to the list and give me some direction if they have any opinions. Right.
Mahesh Jetanandani, I would think the list would be a better option, just to allow extensibility in where if someone wants to, for whatever reason, add a 3rd tag.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So the next presentation will be on tree diagram, and since Martin has already gone back to Sweden, Lou will be presenting. And by the way, I changed this to the pink box is down here now.
So I'm presenting for a draft that I put together that really is Martin's content on tree diagrams. By the way, I really do have to stand up here because I can't see anything. So I'd actually like to spend most of the time on the motivation and not talk about too much on the detail, because we all are familiar with
Bring the microphone closer.
We all are familiar with tree diagrams, and that most documents start out with a definition of what the tree diagram is. And that's a little bit problematic because it means that every reader has to go and see whether or not there's a difference in that particular document's version of the tree diagram. And it gets a little annoying. And it also means it takes time, and then means we have non-standard stuff. So the purpose of the document is really to establish a standard format that we agree upon and use, and then tooling can match. That's really it. The definition here that we started with is an old one. It's not much new. Since then, there's been some discussion on the list that we'd like to make some changes. Perfect. That's the reason to do this in one place. That's it. So what we'd like to do is take this document, adopt it as a working group document, continue the discussion on the mailing list and in the group, agree on a format, publish it, push it out. We do expect that there will be changes in the future. For example, with schema mount, we're thinking there's a good way to represent that. If we get that document done in time that this document is still in the working group, we'll change it here. If it's not done in time, we'll do an update or a BIS. The whole purpose is we have one place that everyone references, and we know what it says, we know what it means, and most importantly, when someone makes a change, we can discuss whether it's a good change or whether it's just because they were confused. Comment.
Jeff, I have two quick comments. Comment number one, you should eventually end up with some sort of boilerplate up in front, just like the 2119, here's what must consider means, that says we are using RFC BLA's version of this. Comment number two, probably should think about what this looks like in SVG, because eventually that's coming.
Can you just lean a little up?
SVG?
Okay. Yeah, and now that 6087 BIS is back in the working group, maybe we throw that reference, pointing to here.
Yeah, Roger K. Google. I think to Jeff's point, we need to be clear of why we're going to change things here, because there's a lot of documents that already use this format, right? So I'm pretty sure that most trees are going to come from Gang right now, and if we change them, it should be very clear that this is this version. So I don't really see the point in changing it. Like, why don't we just adopt the one that's there and go and ship it?
So my personal intent, speaking as a contributor, is that the only changes are additions. So new representations to represent new things. We would not go, again, speaking as an individual, I wouldn't be interested in just changing things that for no apparent reason. What we have works, we have tooling that does it, why change it? Again, contributor.
So wouldn't Christian Hops, when you say that, the last things I saw on the list were like changing to C, so instead of RW it'd be C for config. So you're not supporting all that stuff. That kind of kicked it off. Right?
Once it becomes a working group document, it's a working group decision, and it's the job of the authors to document the working group decision, not their opinions. I've stated a personal opinion.
So, Rob Wilton, the comment I would add is actually I like this idea of documenting this one place. I would personally update it. I think there's some maybe consistencies with how to define it at the moment that we may not come across. So I think it's good to actually review what we have and agree what it should be.
So the trade-off there is that means that what we define is incompatible with existing documents, existing RFCs. I think there's some downside to consider there.
Of course. But they already redefining all those documents anyway, so.
So I think this is all good discussion for when it's a working group document, because the cool thing is, as soon as it becomes a working group document, I don't own it anymore, Martin doesn't own it anymore, you own it. So it doesn't matter what we think, it becomes what you think. So adopt it and take it over.
Yeah, and once it becomes an RFC, the versioning will actually solve the incompatible problem, right? Because old documents will refer to the old RFC. And if you change the stuff, the new documents will refer to the new RFC, so we won't have that.
And they have obsolete or update, so you know to link to the right places. I'd love to give back time, but I'd also love to ask that question, but I can't because down here I'm a contributor. Oh, right.
Benoit, just for information, I put back 6087 BIS within documents. So you've got another place where you can do this change.
Yeah, that gives us an opportunity to put a pointer into this.
All right, so thank you, Lou. So I would like to get a sense from the room. If you would, I'm going to ask a binary question. If you would like to adopt the document as a work group chartered item, yes or no. So first, if you would like to adopt the document, please raise your hand. fair number. And if you are opposed to adopting the this draft as a working group document, please raise your hand. And there's nobody. Thank you. It will be noted and confirmed on the list. And with that, Lada, can we present the markup presentation?
Hi, I'm Láďa Lotka, and I'm going to talk about this individual draft. The aim is twofold. First, to define a metadata item for specifying type of markup that may be used in certain in arguments of certain statements. These 4 statements: contact description, error message, and organization. The choice is quite clear by these 4 statements because they quite often have structured arguments, structured text with multiple paragraphs and so on. And then second, provide some guidelines for reasonable use of markup in those arguments. Some markup, some primitive markup is already used in Yang. We do have several paragraphs quite often. We do have list structures, bulleted or numbered lists, and so on. And if somebody needs to process such descriptions, for example, programmatically, it becomes quite important to know what the indentation rules are, and it's quite important to be consistent as an author of a module and follow some rules for markup. Perhaps it might be useful to use other markup as well. And so it's quite important to know what the rules are. And of course, there is a large number of so-called lightweight markup languages, Markdown in the first place with structured text and so on. And people may use all of them or any of them. So this draft basically introduces one Yang extension that allows for specifying what kind of markup is used. It's a sort of a global statement. Global extension statement means that it can only appear at the top of a module, and then specifies the markup format for the entire module or submodule. I must stress that this is just metadata information, so it doesn't allow anything new what's not already allowed by Yang. You can use some markup in Yang already now, because the arguments have to remain valid and follow all Yang rules. And of course, the document recommends to use only lightweight markup. We could use something more complicated, but the goal is to stay readable even in an unprocessed form. So, actually, Rob commented this draft, and from the discussion, 2 open issues arose. First, so far there is no restriction on the set of permitted formats, so basically anything that, let's say, has IANA registered media type could, in the text registry could be used, possibly, but maybe it might make sense to restrict this a bit so that implementers of tools don't have that much work to do. And one option, one reasonable option would be text markdown, perhaps but perhaps allow different variants of this markdown format. So I don't know. Do you have any opinions on that? Is it reasonable to restrict it, or people may want something else?
Jeff, so for that second case about multiple markups, the problem with saying it imposes it on the whole module is that if you get into something where, for example, a C code fragment or C++ code fragment gets stuck in a markdown segment, it can get interpreted as funny ways, and you end up having to do a crazy amount of escaping to make that not show up that way. Being able to selectively turn it off or selectively change the markdown is actually.
But that's actually the second item here. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. You asked for the first one. Any opinions on that? Does it make sense to restrict it to text markdown?
As long as the registry gives you the ability to add new stuff, and you have a good policy for it, I don't see why not.
I would just suggest something even, as Anish something even simpler, which is just for, the document to suggest a recommended format, a single one, and then have others as optional, so it makes it easier rather than saying it's any of these formats. But I did want to comment overall, this is something that would be really useful because having the ability to generate documentation from the modules is made easier by this. So we have plugins that have to play funny games with paragraph text and unstructured text, as you said, this would solve some of those problems.
Rob Wilson. So basically the same policies and needs that I like the idea. I think it's good. I think it's useful. I would try and restrict the default markup languages to be one to start off with, but allow.
You mean one specific variant of
yeah,
markdown?
I think so. Because otherwise, if you're implementing it, it's really hard to have to implement 4 different versions of different markup languages depending on what purpose using.
William is using MediaWiki, right?
No. So William Luxon, Broadband Forum. I think I said this on the list, but yeah, I also support Markdown, but I also would support some means of having more formal links so that links within the text can be formally validated and potentially converted into things like hyperlinks and HTML and so on. So I think that will increase the quality of the modules. I can understand it might not be popular.
And so we have this second open issue, and as I said, the extension is intended for the entire module or submodule. Potentially, it might be useful either to use it only on very specific statements so that it's turned off on the rest of the document, and perhaps sometimes it might even be useful to use multiple formats, for example, for some initial module metadata. But so the idea is that as an alternative, we could consider restricting the scope for such a statement to follow some rules that are normal in Yang. That means if it's inside a container, it will be valid for the entire container, and so on. So this is not really a difficult thing to do. So if people think that this might be useful, we can, of course, do it. Any opinions on this one?
We're actually over time, so it's good to take it for the rest.
I think I'm done with this. So
what would you like to do with this next?
If possible, if it can become work group item. Otherwise, I don't know what to do with it.
I think it might be good to get some additional input on the list and incorporate that maybe in the next version, but it's still worthwhile to see interest level in the room. And if we could gauge that, how many think that this type of feature would be useful to add? It's a reasonable number. How many think that it's not necessary? 1/2 who voted for both, so it's a little boring. Okay, that's really helpful. Actually, how many have read it? Fewer than have give an opinion. So it clearly indicates that we should get more feedback on the list. It seems that there's interest worth pursuing it, so we'll keep it going. Thank you.
Yeah, Chiffon. Next is configuration scheduling.
And if we can try to keep it to about 5 minutes.
Sure. Okay. And yeah, this topic has been presented in the last couple of IETF sessions. Basically, we're talking about schedule configuration, so we can configure a schedule and set a period of time. So during this time, we can configure certain configuration objects or remove them from the configuration database. So we have got a growing interest on this topic. This is original coming from TE topology model in the TE's working group. And currently, PCE group is also design some resource scheduling mechanism. So this could be useful. And there are some use cases in I2IS. Last IETF session, the DTN working group expressed some interest because they are doing some similar work. And also some operator expressed interest. So since last IETF, we made some changes. There's a similar RFC, which is about remote procedure call scheduling. The authors of that RFC has worked with us on some of the texts, and they did some contributions. So that particular here have a security aspect and some time synchronization aspects. And also we'll address some comments from the NETMOD working group about the data store interaction, validations, expansions, interaction with the logs and authentications. So we added some sections and also did a little bit of model changes, added the operation, and have this notification added. Here's an example, so we can have the configuration scheduled at the particular time for the particular period, and we can also modify existing configuration with the schedule. So that's about it. So we hope to move it forward. We have some other models hope to use this, so we want to have this proceed further. And that, any question? I'm done.
So Kent as a contributor. Last time when you presented this, I mentioned the similarity to a previous expired draft called conditional enablement, which was the original idea was to have like a metadata inactive tag that a way of commenting out nodes, but it could be expanded to be a Boolean expression, which potentially could include time. So there was an overlap with this work. I think the discussion at that time was one that if you use that approach, it solves the same problem, but it maybe is less predictable from a implementer's perspective, because then what it is that's being commented out, it could be anywhere in the whole tree. Where here, I think it's very specific spots where the model designer gets to choose where the schedule is appearing as itself.
Right.
Okay. So I think as a contributor, I actually think I support this approach for doing scheduling over the conditional enablement approach. I mean, not to say the conditional enablement approach could not also be added, but it makes a lot of sense to me that the model designer would be able to choose where scheduling occurs.
At the last meeting, Andy had some comments. It sounded like when in your at the last meeting, Andy had some comments. It sounded in your description that you were addressing them. Is that true, or can you tell us how you address them?
Yeah, we're trying to address them. I don't know fully satisfied Andy's comments or not, but we put some section there. So at least we are trying to move.
Okay, so at the last meeting, we gauged interest in this function, and this type of capability, and there seemed to be some reasonable interest. We'll ask again the same question. How many are interested in supporting this type of function within the working group? I guess I asked it the wrong way because we have far less interest than there was. Are you interested in this draft? Yes or no? So yes. Very few. No. None. I think folks are asleep. There's clearly not a whole lot of interest today. I think we should discuss it a little more on the list and go from there.
Thank you, Siobhan. So next we have Lyle Burse. Oh, I'm sorry. Module tags. Chris Hutz.
Hi, so I'm going to present on something called module tags, which is basically a simple way to associate metadata with models or modules. So the use cases are basically organization and classification of modules, but any other future module metadata could also be incorporated. This is an example. This is one use that we have, an example Yang tree, where we tried to add sort of this organization classification through a tree structure, right? So in routing, we have routing, control protocols, control plane protocol, and then the name ISIS, and then the ISIS augments below that, right? Well, that's really just trying to say that it's a control plane protocol for routing, right? So the new way to do that would be that ISIS is at the root, and then in some list, for example, so then in a list, you associate the tags routing and control plane protocol with ISIS. That way, you could also find all your control plane protocols by looking for that tag. So, excuse me, we have 3 creation points also of tags. The module creation point, the author of the module can add tags. We sort of loosely do that with the description. The implementer can add a vendor tags. And then finally, the user can add their own tag. The key points, I love that title, key points here. It's like what I was saying in my head. The fixed structure, the routing and device model, the problems with it are that the modules depend on an IETF standard parent module. The parent module must be revised to add new structure, and that's a big process. And that the only the authors of modules decide the classification and organization. That's kind of the key one. The authors are the only one. With tags, you have a looser coupling, which is kind of how NetMod has always approached this, but better. Non-IETF organizations can add tags, and users can add and remove tags. Remove was sort of contentious on the list, but it's, I think, very important. And it allows for additional types of metadata. So right now, the document creates a registry for prefixes. The prefix, it creates 3 of them, IETF, vendor, and local. These are the ones I just described. Local is for user. And the allocation policy for prefix is kind of process too, but it's specification required, which means like IEEE could just write their own IEEE document that reserved IEEE as a prefix, and that IANA would then use that to store that prefix. Then we allocate this IETF registry, so we have a registry for any tags that are standardized in RFCs.
Question: is there a reason you're doing it to the model of the module instead of to the individual node in the module?
Doing what?
Sorry, tagging. Are you tagging individual nodes, or are you tagging the whole model?
The whole module.
Okay. Is there any reason we didn't go down to a more granular level?
No, but so you would tag every. I mean, isn't that almost like namespaces?
No, we could talk more in the list.
Okay. So the root level additions, we originally had add tags, remove tags, and reset tags. It was pointed out that add tags and remove tags are end runs around netconf and other normal configuration mechanisms. So we removed those. Reset tags we left, and the reason for that one is because we allow users to remove tags. We thought it would be useful to have a RPC to reset back to the value that the thing shipped with. And there's no easy way to do that in the normal protocols.
Chris, about 2.5 minutes. What? 2 minutes?
Okay, almost done. So we have an addition to a read-only addition to library tags. It's kind of sad we can't actually put the configuration there, but it was created read-only. There's nothing we can put under it to read-write. So we create a list of our own modules with tag lists. We also have a proposal with a grouping so that modules can put a tag list for themselves. That could be a read-only list. And the primary use for that is XPath, right? So you can actually embed an XPath reference that checks the tags. So the open issues are basically where do we access all these things? You know, do we have the Yang library list? Do we have the read-write list we need? Because that gives us, oh, by the way, I missed that. The read-write list also allows us to tag modules that came before this first draft. And there was an argument about users removing tags, and the authors strongly support that. Question?
I wonder how this is related to metadata annotations. It seems to be quite similar concept. So
Could be. I don't know what you're referring to. So
sorry.
I don't know what you're referring to, so it very well could be.
I actually couldn't hear what you said.
Speak closer to the microphone.
It said similar to, and then you faded out.
I was just asking about the relationship between these tags and metadata annotations defined in.
It's a form of metadata.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't hear you either, but yeah, it is a form. It's this metadata, right?
So could it be? I mean, do you expect to be carried in say XML attributes and XML encoding?
No, I mean it's more classification organization though, right? I mean you know metadata is associated with nodes, right? And this is more like I want to find all my modules that are control plane protocols, are IGPs or routing protocols, right? And you're going to keep that list sort of offline. I see it tying into the other thing that Amis presented, right? I think that it could very well work hand in hand with that offline library too.
Benoit, so actually your last comment is exactly what I want to say, because we start to understand that the metadata, metadata for modules are getting more and more important. So somehow there are stacks could be exactly one of the fields in the catalog there. So we will need to somehow combine an instance of this catalog per module, which is something that will need to be done. Now there are different use of the catalog, right? There are things that are across organization, across modules, but there is a specific aspect which is per module.
Okay, so Chris, what would you like to do with this document?
Well, it's really fresh, but it's also a pretty well-known concept, right? Tagging. So I wouldn't mind asking if it could become more configured.
You would?
I'd ask for it to become more configured document.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to get a sense of the room. I mean, it is a very fresh document, but it seems. Sorry, there's a comment to the mic.
Before we get a sense of the room, can we get a difference between this and annotations? Because I don't have any stake in it, but I kind of see the same thing.
Another comment?
I say my understanding the difference between this and LiDAR's annotation. So this is a module, LiDAR's per node, and this is on schema, the LiDAR's on the data. So I see clear differences between this one and that.
But what I see in the draft are some RPCs that are designed to set or remove the annotation. So I would expect that this can be done in some instance data. So maybe I really don't understand how these tags are supposed to be
No, so
applied.
removing tags is not a data issue. It's still operating on the schema.
Where are they removed or added to? Or
From the server.
Yeah, I think we should take this to the list, actually, given it's such a fresh document and the discussion is the way it is right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Wilton, I was just going to say, I like the idea of tagging. I think it's really good. I sort of question whether that should tie more into the catalog. I don't quite get the setting tags on the server bit that I don't understand. Whether this is either stored in the client systems or in some centralized catalog system. That's the idea.
Yeah, it's in the library, but the library is on the server, right? I mean, that's why it was in the library list.
Yeah, I'm not sure the server wants to know this thing.
Okay. We can talk about it on the list.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
And now Lyle can present common argument. Oh, sorry, argument. You know what we were saying with him, I was going to catch myself too.
Yeah, I just like that it was introduced probably correctly. So I'll try to run through this as quickly as possible. Just cutting to the chase. This example is kind of set up so that you can understand a little bit of our problem with the FPC document that we're actually developing. And yep. And so a lot of our work really centers around the RPC model. So we have a lot of structures coming into the input. We're then filling in extra data, sending it back. And then you'll see the structure also in our operational side of the store inside the controllers. And then we'll also send subsequent notifications with the same data structure back. And this has more to do with the fact that we're really using this for call processing. And so everything's highly asynchronous inside the design. So we ended up running into a few problems, and I'll just give you some statistics. So the document itself has 10 modules. 2 of them are core. We decided to keep them pristine. There's no technology selection in them. There's no 3GPP or PMIF or anything. They have the base control user plane concepts. We have 6 other documents or modules that we actually use to kind of set up your particular technology that you're after. And then we have 2 modules that are solely meant to augment the core specs of FPC and tie in technology specific. So currently FPC supports 3GPP specific attributes for control user plane separation, and it also supports your standard IETF PMIF mobility attributes. So as we started doing this, what we found was by doing this, we kept the core clean, but we ended up with quite a few augments. In fact, just running through statistics, we have 63 augments just between the 2 files for 3GPP and PMIF. And this didn't seem like a big issue until we started generating code. And what ended up happening was we ended up with an interesting situation, which was it was hard in a couple of different controllers, and I'll pick on specifically 2. In this case, Open Daylight and ONOS. It was hard as we tried to generate the code to actually have these compilers take advantage of the fact that these were actually, from our point of view, the same augment. We wanted them to be the same structure. What we found out was really that only counted in these particular implementations upon instantiation of the objects inside the code. And we tried to do updates. Unfortunately, when we did subsequent updates, we couldn't do a lot of the copies over. So we tried to code this what I'll call the hard way. And about 2,000 lines into the code, we stopped. And we thought, well, maybe we'll just change the compiler and we'll actually use the common augment idea. So the base idea is that we would pick one of the augments and at least flag it with an extension to say, yes, there are several other augments, but we really intend for these to be the same. And so initially the idea was we would get rid of the other augments, and maybe we would just go to a de facto rule that just said, hey, look, if the body's the same, it's exactly the same augment. And then about a week later, we found a counterexample of this. And what we found out was because the container mattered in basically it was the same attribute, the same augment, the same structure we were using the augments. But because of where it was placed in the tree, it really wasn't semantically the same augment. So we couldn't treat them the same. So we ended up with this compromise, which is basically do as many augments as you like. It's backwards compatible. Use this extension to basically treat it as a compiler hint to let the compiler know it's safe during any time of the life cycle of these objects to basically interchange them or more importantly, copy them. Now, what I'll say is our final contribution is about 10,000 lines of code. I'm trying to read the number here about, almost 11,000 lines of code inside Open Daylights. And keep in mind, we stopped at 2,000 lines of code going kind of the hard way without the common augmentation approach. So I wanted to really just bring this up for your attention because I know we talked a little bit on the mailing list about the fact that maybe we should wait for a language update, those sort of things. And I know in the first session we talked a little bit about extensions versus waiting, those sort of things. This is not the place to hash that. We've already discussed it, but I just really am here to bring this to your attention. And so as far as next steps, what I'd really like is more discussion, obviously not here, but on the mailing list about this particular issue. And I think it's one that we just need to consider going forward. And that's really the intent of this at this time.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to know, oh, yes, comment?
Roger here, Google. Sorry, I didn't quite get the problem space. So the problem space is that you're generating code for this module and you want to reuse exactly the same data structure you build at one location in multiple other locations.
Well, the fact is we did, right? We used a grouping. So semantically, when you actually look into the augment, the body of the augment looks exactly the same uses statement. The problem was because when it's not so much an issue when it's inside the store itself. What we found was when you're using it and passing it inside the system, basically receiving the RPC and the outputs and the notification and the store, we didn't realize that these were treated quite differently inside the controllers. We thought, if I just put it in as an object, right, it's object oriented, it should be easily transposable. And we found out due to some system limitations, and I can kind of take it offline, due to some system limitations, that was not the case. In fact, really what was happening was even though I had a common interface, it was really treating the schema locations, almost hard mapping them, if you will, after the constructor as completely separate objects. So, and I think we take it offline. It's a much longer discussion.
Yeah, sure. I guess I just don't see the need for a language change here. Because we have this problem space in quite a lot of different places, I think, where we augment the same structure in. And it's really an implementation detail as to how efficient you are internally, I think. It's interesting. It's interesting if you reduce the amount of code generation that you have to do because of the commonality, but there's a bunch of different complexities you come to when expanding the tree if you try and guess what's common.
I absolutely agree, because like I said, we were going to go with the cheat and just said if the body's the same, then it must be the same augment. We immediately found a counterexample of that.
Are the modules pre and prior to this change public?
Yes.
Okay, can you link me to them?
I'll do it on the mailing list.
I would like to run code generation against them and have a look at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you have an idea of the gain in terms of code doing that?
Well, yes. So unfortunately, I wear two hats. So not only am I a developer, I'm also a manager on a team for developers. So what I can say is I stopped the hard routes, after about 2 man weeks, and we had the level of effort initially at 9 man weeks, and then once we revised it was going upward. I'll just leave it at that. We had some estimates of 9 man months. I think that may be a little high, but the entire agent, right, was developed in a 12-week cycle. So even 9 man weeks is significant for this. So in general, arguably at least 50% of the time is shaved off if we take the best estimate approach.
Right. Thank you for sharing this. I mean, we need more people sharing their experience there. And if there is something we could do to optimize the code, because in the end we do this for code, then that makes sense.
Thank you, Lyle. I just want to get a sense from the room. How many people have read this draft? Raise your hand. Okay. And does anyone, I mean, who understands the problem space? Raise your hand. All right. Great. Thank you. And next, Rob Wilton, please. Data Model Definition Task Force.
Okay, so I'm doing some work in 82.3 to try and standardize an Ethernet MIB. Jan, wherever she is, she's also participating in this as well. There's a couple of things I want to bring up here. Effectively, there's bits of this where we don't standardize it in 82.3 and want to bring it maybe to IETF. So cover. The standard disclaimer here from IEEE that what I'm representing here is actually my own views and not what's not a formal position from IEEE. Having said that, the people working on the Yang, including 82.3, working with Chair, has reviewed these slides and they're okay with it. So they're defining Yang models, and the key thing here for 82.3 is that they have an internal API between the management layer and the hardware for clause 30 that defines a set of registers and values for programming the hardware. And what 82.3 would like to do is restrict any Yang modules that get created and standardized in 82.3 to only use those registers. So they want people only to write Yang models in 82.3 that can be guaranteed to work with their hardware that's already been effectively shipped or is likely to be shipped. There may be some issues where there's some registers missing from clause 30, and those will be fixed up as appropriate. But the ones here, it's a couple of things that sort of don't quite well fit into clause 30 very well. With that. So the two bits I want to particularly pull out, one is Ethernet statistics. There's the ARM on statistics I've been trying to pull together, but some of that doesn't fit well into 80.3. Some of those counters that have been defined in MIBs don't actually map down to any hardware counter. There's a couple of cases where we're adding those in, but there's some ones where we would like to pull those out, standardize those in IETF as part of my interface common module. And that's things like where you have some historical statistical data statistics for different size of packets, where 82.3 says they don't recognize a frame that's over 2,000 bytes, whereas a lot of people actually run jumbo frames of things. So we would like to standardize that here. And we don't plan, so we don't plan to use all of it, of all the ARM or MIB, only bits of it. So some of that's here, and something else to cover. And then there's also one case going the other way, which is where we've got power over Ethernet. And in that particular case, the MIB was in IETF, it went to IEEE, and they think that only half of the MIB should be in IEEE. So again, they'd like to standardize the bit in IEEE that directly maps those hardware registers. The stuff that's more, the stuff on the power over Ethernet that's more general, they'd like to standardize here. So Jan's put a draft forward in NetMod to do that. And hopefully we get some feedback on whether that's an appropriate approach. I think there needs to be some changes to that module at the moment. It should probably augment the entity Yang model and be based around this. So really, it's sort of a heads up of what's going on in 82.3. If you're interested in Ethernet level Yang, come along and review those models. But it is, I also want to get a feel from the room if there's any concerns with me trying to standardize the bits that I can't do in 82.3 here.
Thank you.
So Alex, we don't have time for a full presentation, but if you just want to come up and just quickly, I don't even know if we bring up your slides. Yeah, yeah, exactly, that's it.
Okay. Anyways, I had a slide deck, but I think we're almost out of time. I just wanted to mention basically a peer mount this is basically a draft that we've had actually. Here. You coming?
Don't click.
Okay, all right. So basically, this concerns Yang mount or Kim mount. We just posted actually an update to the draft. Basically, the purpose of presenting this here, we presented this actually in the past. It was actually the original mount, if you will, before we started to embark on the schema mount work. The draft has been kept a little bit dormant here, but the question is now that the schema mount is almost done. It's a question basically to gauge interest in reviving this work, and also pointing out actually the difference between what schema mount does and what Yang mount does. Essentially, the purpose of Yang mount was to define to mount instances.
So I think we should stop it there actually, and because we're with a limit. But we'll just go ahead and give Alex some quick feedback. How many people in the room have read this draft or at least familiar with the concept that's in this draft? Please raise your hand. Okay. And how many people are interested in this work moving forward? And we're not calling for adoption, just interested in having this work moving forward. A level of interest. Please raise your hand.
So the first one had a reasonable number. I would say the second one has a smaller number. Right?
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
So key feedback that you want from the group, ask on the list.
All right. Okay. I'll do that. I'll summarize also particularly actually this slide, the differences, because I think this may not be clear exactly how the two relate.
They're different things. It's okay for them both to proceed. So
right.
Let's talk about it on the list. Thank you very much.
All right.
We know that there's a lot of interest in the what to do next with revised data stores. Expect to see text on the list. Again, that'll be proposed text for inclusion in a working group document, so it goes through the normal process. So discuss it.
And whoever's blue sheets, please hold them up.
Thank you, and see you in Prague.